Brands need to stop thinking of themselves as the center of the conversation and start putting their audience first. If you focus on fulfilling their interests, whether through information, education, or entertainment, you're not chasing engagement anymore. You're creating value, and that's what drives real organic growth. That's a quote from Clayton McLaughlin and a sneak peek at today's episode. Hey there, I'm Kerry Curran, revenue growth consultant, industry analyst, and host of Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast. Every episode, I sit down with top experts to bring you actionable strategies that drive real results. If you're serious about growth, hit subscribe and stay ahead of your competition today. Organic social media has evolved. It's no longer just a place for brands to post pictures and hope for engagement. It's now a critical driver of consumer interest and revenue growth. But with so many platforms, algorithms, and trends shifting constantly, how can brands move beyond vanity metrics and turn organic social into a true brand asset? In From Social to Strategy, How Smart Organic Content Fuels Consumer Interest and Revenue Growth, I sat down with Clayton McLaughlin. He's the EVP at BBDO's Innovation Division, DaVino. Clayton and I break down how brands can shift their social media approach from passive posting to proactive strategy. We dive deep into how brands can leverage consumer intent, high-value content, and strategic engagement to drive measurable business impact. Be sure to stay tuned to the end, where Clayton shares the best next steps to improve the value of your organic social content today. Are you ready to take your marketing strategy to the next level? Let's go. So welcome, Clayton. Please introduce yourself and share all about your background and expertise.
Sure. Happy to be here. I'm Clayton McLaughlin, EVP business lead for an innovation lead inside of BBDO called DaVino. So I've been there almost a year now, but spent nearly 20 years inside the ad industry, agencies of various sizes, working on brands of various sizes as well. Always in the digital world, but have bounced between now both the media side and the creative side. So I'm trying to fulfill the full agency roster at this point.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you today. I know you've got a wealth of experience. So what is it that you're, I know we could cover tons of topics, but what is kind of top of mind? What's hot for your clients in the brands that you're talking with today?
Yeah, love when you say wealth of experience. It really just means you're old. I appreciate that. No, top of mind for us. So it's all been about organic social for me for the last year or so, which again I think is the sort of forefront of digital right now. So that's where we spent a lot of our time, and we laugh that it feels a lot like the old SEO conversations that we used to have 15, 20 years ago about the value of organic social and what it really means and how we position organic and think about it a little bit differently outside of being just a traditional sort of social platform, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I know the wealth of knowledge. We've been around, been in the industry a long time, and I remember the old days of SEO and just trying to prove the value or just convince marketers of the value and why it was so important. So I know I get it, and I see organic social is become more and more prevalent. And you've talked about kind of a unique perspective on how to perceive it as you're building out your strategies. Talk about that.
Yeah, we like to talk about it's not social media, it's interest media. So in that world, we think of the original Facebook was a lot about engagement and communities and those sort of pieces, and now social is so much broader than just anything meta, and obviously there's multiple platforms, and all of those have their own unique flair. But the one thing we think that is central to all of these platforms is the idea that everybody is going on those platforms to find information or have conversations about what they're interested in. Mm-hmm. Right. So whether that's a hobby or what you're doing for work, or even if you just want to be entertained, it's all about your interests. And if you can shift from this idea of like communities and engagement on social, where you're chasing likes, to now it's about interests. Now you're trying to fulfill interests for your audience. You're trying to give them, this value exchange that I was saying, like marketing to me is just 100% about a value exchange. And as a brand, if you're able to tap into that by talking about or providing information or entertaining within the category of interests for who your target audience is, I think that puts a little bit of a different perspective on social, right? When you stop chasing likes and you start actually thinking more about the value exchange between yourself as a brand and who your target customers are.
Yeah, no, that's super, super interesting, because it's definitely, we're all going online and using the social platforms in different ways and different mindsets. So it seems like it's taking the perspective of interest media is a valuable like tool in your playbook around building that awareness, getting those new eyeballs, or building loyalty, engagement with your existing customers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the whole point for us, again, is I think it's how do we think about it a little bit differently, and position ourselves not in the center, but position your audience and who your target audience is in the middle of it. And now, again, not only are you able to connect better with them, but you're also able to find unique ways to do that. Like there's new creative territories, new ways to have a conversation with that audience that might, like 6 months ago, may not have felt as relevant. But as a brand, you can start to work through some of those territories. And I think that puts you in a unique space to find those incremental eyeballs. Because realistically, it's all about incrementality too, right? Even when I was on the paid side for a long time, it's always about incrementality. Like it's great, there's loyalty in certain pieces, and that's fine. But ultimately, like you need a churn of consistent new customers. And if that's what you're trying to do, which realistically is what every brand is trying to do, but if that's what you're trying to do in organic social in particular, like having these unique ways in and thinking about these different interests as a way to insert yourself into a relevant conversation, or to build a relevant conversation. I think it's harder to do that if you think about it and just how do I have an engagement with these? Then you're just you're saying the same thing that everybody else is, versus trying to find a unique way in to be able to reach this new incremental audience.
Right. And yeah, and to your point, it's being purposeful and aligning that engagement with your brand, and with like the attributes of your brand, and your brand's target audience, really, not just playing and participating anywhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And I know we talked about, there's like obviously especially for organic social, its strategies are different for B2B and B2C. The platforms are, well, there's a fair amount of overlap. There's, as you talked about, there's a mindset for each platform. So let's, diving in more for the brands that are really trying to engage with consumers, and whether they're B2C or D2C, talk about kind of how it's, how and where and when should a brand kind of figure out which platform is for them?
I think that's key. That's core of what brands need to do, is they're thinking about an organic strategy as a whole. So I put that as like one of the first things you need to consider. But again, each channel is unique, or each platform is unique in what they provide. That's why they have, there's still a reasonable amount of users that are spread across all these different fragmented channels, is because they do each provide something a little different, right? So YouTube, we were talking about this. YouTube is, everybody still wants long form. I understand that YouTube wants to do shorts, and frankly, they're annoying as hell, right? I still want to go to YouTube, and I want longer form content. That's what my expectation is. Obviously, Instagram is different. Pinterest is more inspiration driven. TikTok is more the snippet short form kind of work. You could argue what Snap and X and the roles that they have in the world as well, but truly each of those channels does have a different place to live. And I think that's an important thing, not just in how brands are thinking about those channels, but if you're being really sort of ruthless in your channel selection, you're also understanding where your brand actually fits. There's certain brands that are going to be more aspirational. They fit better on Instagram naturally, or TikTok naturally, versus, a brand like Red Bull is, I think, one of the most fascinating brands in the world from a marketing standpoint, because they're a content company, like first and foremost, but they also sell energy drinks, and oh yeah, they have like the best F1 team in the world, and they do all these races. Like, it's a really wild, but their content, like, they live so well in a lot of places, but their home is YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, they make their home on YouTube, and then everything else is just a distribution channel for their long form work, which I think is a really interesting way to go about it. But they were very smart about where they should live and where it makes sense for them. Pinterest, I think, is a really unique channel in that sense too. Like, it is so inspiration driven. Like, what are the brands that make the most sense there? There's the inherent ones, the like design companies and those sort of things too. But like, Nike does really well on Pinterest because for 40 years they've had an aspirational, inspirational brand. And so, I think there's spaces for them to live in that world as well. So as you're talking about channels, there's the obvious of just like, where is your audience at, first and foremost, right? If you want to go after Gen Z, then yeah, it's TikTok all day, Instagram. But you also have to feel like, where does my brand make the most sense, where I don't necessarily have to recreate? So depending on, an iconic old brand like Nike versus a new D2C brand, you can go about it a little bit different way. But I think that's a crucial piece too, is like, where is an immediate natural fit for who I am as a brand, what my voice is and what I stand for. And then it's also, was my audience there? The conversation about the interests that I think are the right ones for me, are those being had on this platform? Do I join that? Do I create it? So there's obviously a lot of things to go. I mean, we literally build 100-page plus strategy decks when it comes to social playbooks and things like that. So there's a lot of things to think through, but a lot of it comes back to the sort of core fundamentals.
Yeah. And it's, to your point, there's so many different aspects, so many different nuances, and it's what type of content. Is it static images? Is it more text heavy? Is it the video? Is it long form? Is it short form? And finding that and what resonates. And a big part of that is kind of measuring, or first of all, identifying what your right KPIs are, as you started to touch on, and engagement. Like, talk about how, I guess, the right how you're identifying the right KPIs and how you can kind of optimize towards those for your brand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the KPI conversation always comes back to objectives of the business, and you start with those sort of pieces, and those are the obvious ones, right? But I think there's this idea too of sort of short-term goals and long-term goals.
Yep.
And we started to position measurement in our world as fast and slow data. So what's the data that I get right away? That's your engagement stuff, the likes, the comments, and those sort of pieces, which have their space and they're valuable. But the problem is that when you look at those metrics, you're looking at a point in time. And like we keep alluding back to, like, organic social is the new SEO in this world of, like, there's a compound interest. And so I laugh at it. When I talk about this, I love to quote Warren Buffett, which seems like a strange thing to do in a marketing podcast, but the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest. The value of all of these things that I'm doing over time, what does that look like? As opposed to, let's look at engagement for a single post, and if it didn't go viral, then it was a mistake, or it wasn't. That's just fundamentally not true. And so, we had these same conversations about SEO 20 years ago. Is like, the value of this platform that is alive 24/7. Your customer can be there 24/7. They can get in contact with you. They can find out information. And now, websites are taking on a whole different sort of world where they truly are live 24/7 with AI, chatbots and things along those lines. Different conversation. But in that same world where there's this compounded interest of your voice as a brand over and over, the consistency in the marketplace, and there's a value to that long term too. So as we're laying out KPI and thinking about how do we evaluate performance of this, we want to look at, those engagement things are nice because they also help you guide, am I talking about the right thing, that kind of stuff. But overall, if you want to understand the success of an organic social program, look at the compounded interest over time. And those specific metrics are totally different. And realistically, I think those are completely custom built based on an individual brand. Like, there's not a one size fits all measurement plan that's going to do that effectively of businesses of any size. But I would definitely encourage anyone to think about the short term and long term, or fast and slow data, however you want to think about it. And you don't have to get into like these $1 million media mix models and things to understand the impact. I have a whole different perspective on those, but again, that's a different thing.
Hey everyone, it's me, Kerry Curran. If you're a B2B company that sells to marketers, whether you're an agency, MarTech, or AdTech, and your revenue is either flattening, declining, or just not growing fast enough, I can help. I've spent my entire career selling, marketing, and servicing marketers, so I know firsthand the challenges they face, the buying decisions they make, and what actually moves the needle. The truth is, most marketing strategies aren't built for revenue growth, but mine are. As your fractional chief growth officer, I'll bring revenue-focused marketing strategies designed specifically for selling to marketers, deep expertise in agency, MarTech, and AdTech buying behaviors, modern go-to-market strategies that include everything from brand awareness to driving loyalty and retention, and a track record of doubling and even tripling revenue for B2B companies just like yours. So if you're tired of your stagnant results and you're ready to build a marketing engine that actually drives revenue, let's talk. Visit revenuebasedmarketing.com or connect with me on LinkedIn to schedule a consultation. Together, let's build a smarter, more profitable path forward. RBMA, Revenue-Based Marketing Advisors, we're revenue-based marketing that works. But it's you bring up valid points too, and then there's the compounding effect as well is the measurement of the mentions and conversations and buzz around your brand. And you talked a bit about from an engagement perspective, proactive and reactive. So dig into a bit about that from a strategy and activation perspective, but also kind of the value perspective.
Yeah, I've used this analogy too, that organic social is not like the field of dreams. It's not if you build it, they will come, right? Because you can speak to yourself for years and years and years, and nobody gets it, right?
Yeah.
So there is this proactive and reactive nature. The reactive is that if you build it, they will come. And in most instances, if you're consistent about it, you're good about it, like you'll grow. Yeah. But is it at the rate that you want, or is it the right people, which is a whole different discussion too. So there's the reactive nature of the engagement and what that means. But then there's the more proactive piece, or community management. How are you as a brand going into the community? Right. So not just engaging on your own page, which you definitely should be doing 100% of the time, but also how are you putting the brand into conversations that are relevant? So you're not going to go, wild and start talking on things that don't make any sense for your brand. But within the relevant spaces and those territories that you've identified by understanding interests, now you can put yourself into those conversations, and that's more of a proactive engagement. And you can measure that. So if you think of engagement from a measurement standpoint, you can measure what that outreach looks like and the engagement that you get from that. But I think that's just it's an often overlooked part of a really strong organic social program. And the same way that you should talk about paid boosting and what that does for you, because realistically 99% of your content, like, it's not going to go viral. And virality shouldn't be the goal. Like, virality should be a byproduct of creating something really like a great idea that came from a great insight, and something that's relevant. Right. So, I think there's these elements of, the proactive and reactive in that world, where it's like you should be out having the proper conversations and inserting the brand in the right places. And I think that becomes part of a much broader strategy that is, if you build it, they will come. You've got the boosting, you've got the outreach, you've got all those things that combined. Now you're talking about a well-rounded program that's probably having the effect that you want it to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's to your point, the engagement that you build upon joining in the conversations that are happening about your brand, especially if you have a brand that people are passionate about and talking about in their social video and content. And I like what you said about going viral, because we always hear the stories of the brand saying to the agency, create me a video that's going to go viral, create me a post that's going to go viral.
Yeah. And if you're a brand and an agency, or anybody comes in and says, I guarantee you will go viral, run. It's absurd. Like, I laugh because you see this on like LinkedIn too, where's the B2B outreach, like, we can guarantee you're going to get X amount of it. It's like, again, but like, who are these people? Like I can get you 1 million followers tomorrow, but 999,000 of those are going to be Russian bots that aren't any good. Right. So there really is no magic, I think, behind what virality is. For me, most of that is realistically is a momentum thing. I mean, I think the biggest content creators in the world and what kind of works for them, like there's a set of best practices that, you should follow, because there's, we know enough about the algorithms on these platforms to know the cadence and the frequency and the tone of voice and the topics at which you're talking about. You need to be consistent with those things. But thinking that, there's some sort of formula or equation that is going to guarantee virality or reach for these things, it's silly.
Right. And I think too, such an important part of the organic social strategy is quality versus quantity. And I think that comes to, one, your posts and the content you're putting out there, but two, to your point, your follower count or your engagement counts. Like, to your point, lots of likes from people that are bots, or not, or people that are bots, or
Exactly,
aren't likely to buy your product for themselves or someone else. Like, that's great, but to your point, it's like honing in on what your target audience is engaging with, what they're looking for, being part of that conversation. There's so much potential, and you've given us a lot of really smart things to think about.
And I think you said an important thing. Like, it's, if you think about paid media, the reason that we've all fallen in love with digital media is because it has this promise of being able to reach the right people. Right. And you can be very specific and targeted about, this is the demographic and the 97 activities I lay on top of that to make the specific audience. Right. But in that same sense, like, we should be thinking about who that is for organic too. Because it is like, look, if your real goal is incrementality, at some point you're going to pull in some people that may not be who you thought they were, but if they're interested, like, I'm not going to not sell to boomers because I was trying to get into the Gen Z audience. Like, that's silly. I said silly not twice. That's an interesting approach for me. Anyway. So it is about, your ability to reach those specific audiences and that target audience who you want. And again, we personally believe, and I believe wholeheartedly, that the best way to do that is to think about their interests first, not like, okay, what is the social community doing? Because if you get caught up trying to jump on every single trend and you just become so inauthentic.
Agreed.
Where it's like you went from like jumping in the pool here to I don't know, shows the trends that I think are trendy are probably not the ones that actually are. But I think if you get caught up chasing those things, and they have their place, don't get me wrong, we talk about this a lot, like, how do we fit brands into real-time trends? There's a place for those, but again, it has to be something that makes sense for your brand.
Right. Definitely.
Like, what I would do, as I don't name a department store or something, is completely different than what Red Bull's going to do. Right? They're jumping out of planes and sending people up to like the stratosphere and having them jump out. Like, that's a different world. So
you're right, and I think that's where knowing your brand identity, your brand voice, before you start creating content, to make sure that it is consistent and you're not all of a sudden going from more like mom and parenting engagements, to your point, to like jumping out of planes. It needs to kind of all tie together. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience and it's not going to resonate. So 100%. I think this is super smart.
Well, and you can even find, like, I've noticed even a lot of the content creation tools lately, like AI tools in particular. I think the really smart ones and effective ones ask you those questions first. What's your brand voice? What's your tone want to be? If you don't have those, let's build those things for you. So, those tools are all built on best practices for good content creation. And so if you're using those and you don't have those answers yet, then you need to spend some critical time answering those things. The other thing too is, I think a lot of brands have those answers, but they may not be as relevant for social. Like, I think it makes sense for brands to give themselves a little bit of leeway on social too. You don't have to be the exact same brand everywhere that you are. There's certainly North Stars and things that you need to map back up to. And you can't be, again, like a department store. Macy's can't be Red Bull, right?
But you're right. Like, based on the audience of the platform, the content that does well on those platforms. You want to match the tone with the audience and
Yeah,
what they are used to seeing there. So it's super smart.
for sure.
Great. So, Clayton, this has been really, I love this, and I love all of the examples you've given, because it's just like SEO 20 years ago. It's an undervalued play. It made me think about too, when back in the day when I was selling SEO 20 years ago, and we'd go into, well, not quite 20 years ago, but when Facebook was starting to be part of a digital strategy, we'd go into our SEO pitches and we'd say, "Oh, you should do a Facebook page," and the
Right.
brands would be like, "Oh my God, you're so innovative, you're so smart."
Yeah.
And I tell that story all the time, just to kind of, I don't know, age myself, but like, or to just talk about how the evolution has changed. But it's but you're right. Like, the organic social has such a place in strategies today, and it shouldn't be an afterthought, and it can be such a valuable strategy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So for the people who've been listening to your great examples and advice, like, and they're like, yeah, I need to start having a real strategic approach to my organic social. Like, what are their first steps? Like, what do they need from a readiness perspective to get started?
Yeah, I mean, I always just sort of harken back to marketing 101. Like, we've said it, I think, 100 times in the conversation, just in the short time we've been discussing. But you got to know who your audience is. So who are they? And then when you can identify that, now you can understand where are they spending their time, what are the things that they're engaging in, and then start to understand their interests, which isn't as easy, said as done in some instances. But in that world, now you know who they are, you know where they're at, you know what they're interested in. That starts to give you some groundwork for where you need to go from there. So that'll be good for channel selection. And again, if you've done an evaluation of your brand as well, and you know who you are and what you stand for, and what you believe you can authentically bring to the ecosystem, then now your channel selections are pretty much done at that point, because you know where your audience is, you know where you feel comfortable as a brand, you know what you should be talking about. That gives you channels, that starts to give you creative territories to have conversations. And then I would think sort of thinking critically about what you want to talk about. So again, coming back to those interests, what does make sense for you? So we had talked before, like Mr. Beast as an example, the biggest content creator in the world, he's taken and he creates multiple channels across his entire empire, because he understands that the algorithms, but the people that are consuming his content as well, he's got his own food line now, and that's a whole different conversation than like his standard approach and his game show and all of these game shows he has, right? So he recognizes that it's this idea of like content swim lanes. There's certain places that you want to live in, and so understand what your voice is, what your content swim lanes are, your content themes, if you will. That's old school content marketing, SEO work as well. But it helps, because that's going to help. One, your consumers are going to be more consistent with what they expect from you, but then the algorithms are going to know what to expect from you as well, which is obviously an important part to anything that we're talking about from a digital inspiration discovery standpoint. Yeah,
too. And I think I'd add as well is, like, you don't need to be on all the platforms. So start with one or two, get those going, get those right, and then determine if you need to expand. So
and I'd say be ruthless.
Super helpful.
Be ruthless. Like, don't put yourself in places where you're not going to be able to deliver against it. And if it just doesn't make sense for your brand, doesn't make sense. Pinterest doesn't make sense for a lot of brands. Right? Snapchat X certainly doesn't make sense for a lot of brands. A whole different conversation. But again, Snapchat, TikTok, like there's very unique instances for those, and they can be done really well. But be ruthless. And don't put yourself in a territory where you can't deliver.
Or where you don't have the resources or bandwidth to have that consistency and presence. So, this is super smart and valuable. So thank you, Clayton. So, now how can people find you?
Honestly, the easiest way is probably LinkedIn. Clayton McLaughlin there too. You'll see, I think I've got at one point I had like an old Viking AI picture that made me look like I was like a Viking / Santa Claus. I think it's changed now. So it's just me, but the gray hair is pretty easy to spot generally. So not too many Clayton McLaughlins out there. So
excellent. I'll make sure to have that in the show notes as well. But Clayton, thank you so much. Always
Absolutely.
good to see
Always
you
a
and
pleasure,
catch up
Kerry.
with you. And we will hopefully see you in person
Yeah.
sometime soon.
Get out there. All right.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
All right.
Kerry.
Thanks, Clayton.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're struggling with flat or slowing revenue growth, you are not alone. That's why Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, brings you expert insights, actionable strategies, and real-world success stories to help you scale faster. So if you're serious about your revenue growth, hit follow, subscribe, and drop a 5-star rating. It helps us keep the game-changing content coming because we're dropping new episodes regularly, and you do not want to miss out.